Hello friends, and welcome to video number 3 of the Photographer's Question and Answer. And these questions came from people who are on my mailing list at markhemmings.com. Okay, so let's get right into it. Now, in this video, we're going to talk about equipment, but it's sort of equipment related to best practices. Okay, so the first one is about lenses, and this is from Tom. Hello, Mark. What is a solid explanation for the difference of photos taken at, let's say, 200 millimeter by different photographers? Often in our group site, we see a photo taken at 200 millimeter that is closer, clearer, just better than another. Both are taken with good settings, good equipment, good composition, but very different in the viewing. Do good lenses of similar style differ in result? Can one lens see 200 millimeters or so differently than another? I hope this question makes sense. Tom, it makes perfect sense, and I'm really happy that you asked it because I have some great answers for you. Now, the first answer is if you have a 200 millimeter lens on what's called a full frame sensor camera compared to a 200 millimeter lens on what's called a crop sensor. And a crop sensor is known by the term APS-C or micro four thirds. Then you will have a different view, a very different view in fact. The cropped sensor view will look more telephoto, meaning more zoomed in, than the full frame camera. Now, full frame cameras, and we're talking about DSLRs or mirrorless, full frame cameras are usually a little bit more expensive. They're usually what's called prosumer or professional cameras, and they have a larger chip or larger sensor in the camera, which often, but not always, allows for a better picture because there's more pixels. They're actually called photosites, but more pixels I'd be able to put onto this chip. Now, I don't want to disparage crop sensor cameras because I use one. I use Fujifilm, and they use crop sensors, which is called APS-C size. And whenever you're using a lens on an APS-C or cropped sensor camera, you're actually, one advantage is that you're getting a longer view, a more telephoto view. So interestingly, bird photographers, nature photographers, those who are on African safaris, when they use a crop sensor camera, as long as the quality is good and it has a good chip, for example, Fujifilm and some Sonys, although Sonys are usually larger chips, but you can actually get more telephoto view than your maybe the buddy next to you who has a full frame Nikon or Canon. Now there's a downside. It's harder to get a wide angle lens, a wide angle view with a crop sensor. So it's possible that when you're comparing two images using even the same lens, that this is what's happening, is that the two photographers have two different sensor sizes. Now there's another thing as well. Let's say that both of you have a 200 millimeter lens. One of them is a professional lens that goes to the widest aperture of f2.8, and another person has what's called a consumer lens where the widest aperture f-stop is f5.6. Well, right away you're going to get a vast difference in look, especially if both of you are photographing what's called wide open, meaning that you are using the lowest f-stop number possible. So the person who has the f2.8 lens is actually going to get a richer, a potentially richer or more artistic look because there's going to be more background blur, some really attractive blur behind the subject, whether it be a person's face, whether it be maybe, like think of the African safari, the lion, you got the lion and the background's blurry. Okay, but if you have a different lens that doesn't have a low f-stop number, then you're going to see the twigs behind the lion. There's so many factors that go into lenses that would allow for a different view. Now, the third factor is simply the quality of the camera. So, for example, you may have a extremely good camera, and you could have a consumer camera, and based on the way that the camera manufacturers program or read the color information and the light information that comes into the camera and into the sensor, you can actually get very different results. So for example, I always really love the colors and the look of images from my Fujifilm. And the people who program the camera, they obviously know something about photography, because for some reason skin tone always looks great. So this is, a lot of times, the image that comes out of the camera onto your computer screen has some element of programming and interpretation that was created by a human or humans. This is very interesting. And you could say, well, what about RAW? RAW is just pure data. Well, that's true. However, you can still have raw images that are interpreted according to the desires or what the programmers think looks best. I hope I'm explaining myself properly. But what I'm just trying to say is that two camera manufacturers can actually produce two radically different looks, even though the two photographers are shooting the exact same scene and have the exact same camera. So it can be a little bit frustrating, because you could say, well, look, we're photographing the same thing, even we're both in RAW. Well, that actually still doesn't matter, because each camera manufacturer has its own recipe on how to interpret data. And that's that light data that comes into the camera. Okay? So those are a few obvious things that I'm thinking of why the images may look different. And also one other thing, most 200mm, most zoom lenses have what's called image stabilization, just to sharpen the pictures. And I don't think this is what you're referring to, but some people may have blurrier pictures because they didn't make use of that image stabilization. Okay, that was a great question, and I hope I answered it for you. Okay, so let's get to the next one. This is from Neil. Hi Mark, I took pictures of my niece's wedding last year. I don't use flash inside the church and wasn't the primary photographer for the event. The windows were completely blown out, but could be recovered in Lightroom. That still left glare on groomsmen standing near the windows. Yeah, that would make sense. When I use Lightroom to reduce the glare, it darkens their features. I also tried dehaze, which works somewhat after selecting the brush tool. Is there anything else I can try? Okay, Neil, so wedding photographers are extremely skilled at making sure that they do not have radical differences in light levels. Let me give you an example. Now, I'm glad that you didn't use a flash. Flashes usually produce an ugly look unless you're really good at flash, unless you actually have your flash off the camera. Then you can get some cool results. But I think you're referring to having the flash on the camera. The problem is that there was the position of yourself as the photographer needed to change. You needed to actually move around to where there was not such a radical amount of backlight. Now we know that churches, at least I don't know what the church looked like that you were in, but my guess is that there was more light outside the church windows in the normal air, because it was sunny out maybe, than there was amount of light inside the church. This is normal. So whenever we have a situation where the people are between the camera and the super bright windows, we usually get what's called a silhouette. Now this silhouette does not look good for weddings because we can't see the people. So what you have to do as a photographer is actually move quickly and not allow the wedding party or the bride and groom to be anywhere in between you and the window. Because the amount of brightness variability, or the differential, I think it's called, the differential of light, is just going to be too much for your camera to handle. And you can't use HDR because the people are moving. So here's the problem. The solution is really old-fashioned. You physically have to move yourself away so that the bride and groom or the groomsman or the mother-in-law is definitely not in the middle of you and that bright backlit situation, that hugely lit window. It's that simple. And if you follow that advice, then you will be able to get some amazing photos even without using flash. In fact, I don't ever advise the flash unless you're doing what's called off-camera flash. And if anyone wants to know what that means, there's a great resource online, a whole bunch of resources online on doing off-camera flash, and one of them is called Strobist.com. I suggest you check that out. And what they do is they just teach you how to utilize flash off camera to make amazing images. Could be for weddings, could be for products, could be for portraiture or anything. Okay, Neil, I hope that helped. And I probably would say that you know enough about Lightroom that you probably can't fix that problem. You've probably done a lot to rectify that issue, and it may not be fixable. However, there's no problem just sending me a snapshot of the picture, or sending me the raw file, and I'll see what I can do just for you. Okay, awesome. So thank you, Neil, and thank you, Tom. And if you're wondering why these questions came in, they are, again, because of an offer I put out to those who are on my mailing list, markhemmings.com, where I give free content and free offers almost every week. And you're welcome to join up. I'd love to have you there. And for those who still have more questions, I'll get to a video actually probably tomorrow, and I will have your questions answered for the Friday deadline. Okay, have a super day, happy shooting, and all the best.